Hey guys, and welcome back to another edition of the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. I am a recovering Ray Russell here, guys. And this week we continue on that journey back to Georgia Championship Wrestling 1983 to 1985. Bob's time working not only in the ring as a performer, a professional wrestler, if you will, but also behind the scenes as Ole Anderson's right-hand man, an agent for the territory. And here to tell us so many more great stories here this week about his time in Georgia Championship Wrestling. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back, the one and only Mr. Bob Roop.
Well, thanks, Ray. It's good to be back with you, and also with you out there, our devoted listeners, or if you're not devoted, whatever your motivation, as long as you're listening, I'm happy, you know. Maybe, I think some of you maybe are not real happy with everything I say, but that's okay. That's the way it should be.
Well, if they're long-time listeners, they're devoted to being undevoted because they're here every week. So we appreciate you either way.
Yeah. But,
well, you know, it's a finicky world, those wrestling fans out there, because in some people's eyes, you can rape, maim, and murder. And that's okay. But when you try to run opposition to the NWA, that is just not cool, Bob Roop. We can't have that kind of shit here in professional wrestling. And but this is a good point in your life now. Now you built back up. You had a successful run for the Mid-South and Bill Watts. We talked about leaving Mid-South last week. And now you're in Georgia Championship Wrestling, working underneath Ole Anderson. And you slowly morph into Ole's right-hand man, so to speak, his agent, if you will, here, working underneath Ole in the booking office, but also wrestling for a period of time as well during this period in the early to mid-'80s, 1983 into 1985. And last we left off, we had some conversations about drug use, the drinking, everything really escalating here in the 1980s with a lot of the younger talent. Mad Dog Buzz Sawyer, we told a story on him. The Wildfire Tommy Rich flipping over the car that he just doesn't remember being a part of. But Ole had the papers to prove it, by damned. And so lots of great stories last week. We got a lot of great feedback. People loved the fact that we were going through excerpts in Ole's book and you were kind of validating, verifying. It was kind of funny for me. There was a few puzzle pieces as I read his book. We covered last week, but we're going to continue moving forward. You told us stories in the past that now the other side of the puzzle, Ole explains, and now it all fits together. And last week, stories that we've heard Ole tell, and you kind of finished the puzzle for us. So it's fun to see it from both ends, and now the entire story's out there. So I hope to continue to do that as we continue on this journey, because we're going to be in Georgia for quite a while, guys. We're going to start with Ole's book, and then we're just going to go from there. Lots to get into.
Well, it came across last week, and if you're a new listener, I'm an Ole fan. Ole was my friend, and I had a couple friends in the business. When I mean friends, I'm talking about real friends. It's hard to be friends with wrestlers because I said this before, but you're always competing. You're competing to be the top spot. Mm-hmm. You want to be the main event. Well, I didn't always, but a lot of people, your goal is to be the top, the last match, right, and to be the star of the show. Why? Because you get the most money. And that was the only reason people were doing what we did, doing 300,000 miles a year and all that kind of thing. The money was what we were doing it for. And so you wanted to be in that main event. But anyway, I'm glad we're back.
Oh yeah, it's great to be in Georgia, and like I said last we left off, we were talking a little bit about some of the wild times some of the wrestlers were having in that era, and of course you being suckered into trying a little peyote, maybe a little cacti, and some other things throughout your career. You weren't necessarily the innocent one in regards to trying a pharmaceutical or two throughout your wrestling career, and of course having a few drinks as well. And so Ole kind of learns through you that there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and Ole completely admits here, and we're going to read an excerpt, to being naive to the drug use that was actually going on at the time. And so I wanted to go back and read you a little bit more from Ole's book. It involves you, but in general, it involves a bigger problem that he was having business-wise, it would seem, that he didn't even realize, or what he realized there was an issue. He didn't know what it was until Bob Roop came along, and I want to read that for you right now. So Ole says, the first time I saw wrestlers using drugs, they were smoking marijuana. But by the 1980s, marijuana was no longer the choice. It was cocaine. I'm so thankful that Bob Roop was working for me. Bob was great. He kept me tuned into what was going on in the world. I first met Bob in 1971 when I was wrestling in Florida. When he went to work for me in 1983, he came out of Bill Watts' territory. Bob was great. To my knowledge, while he was working for me, he never touched this stuff. But because of his background, he was invaluable to me. Bob was not stooging to me, but drug use by the boys was a real problem. He had been around all that stuff and could alert me to the possible problems that might crop up. He opened my eyes to what everyone was doing. And you talked about that last week, Ole specifically saying you weren't stooging off anybody. And you said you kind of made a deal with Ole. Like, Ole, I know I'm working for you, but I'm also kind of one of the boys. And that's not cool to just go around stooging people. So you said you went to Ole and told him, if you got a question about a certain guy or a certain thing, you can come to me and I'll talk to you about it. But I'm not just going to come to you and rat everybody out.
Yeah, let me tell you, I remember specifically, we were in Cleveland and Tommy Rich he acted like he was just coming out of a coma or something. He couldn't get hardly, you talked to him, it seemed like it'd take him like 5 seconds before he understood what you said.
Okay.
So Ole, normally, I ran the shows. For some reason, I gave the guys their finishes and whatever, but for some reason he had to talk to Tommy. He went in the dressing room, he was talking to him. And Tommy was the same with him. And, it looked like sometimes you'd be talking to Tommy and you'd ask him something, and you'd look at him, you get the impression he didn't even hear you because he wouldn't be responding, he wouldn't be looking at you, he wouldn't be saying anything. And you go, well, Tommy, are you there? What had happened, he went to talk to Tommy about something, and Tommy was in that, what he was doing halcyon sleeping pills and with a beer or two. Mm-hmm. And that was getting him nice and mellow. But the problem was he was doing it before he came to the matches. I spied whatever you do afterwards on your way home, you're back on you're still at work, but you don't have your work, the active work in front of people in front of you, it's behind you. And if you want to relax, that's fine. But anyway, Ole went to talk to him and could barely, and he came to me and he said, hey, you see Tommy Rich? I said, yeah. He said, what's wrong with him? He said, he's I'm talking to him. He's looking at the ceiling. He's looking off in space. What's the problem? Well, in order to tell Ole the truth, I had to, I had never talked to him about the boy. I'd never gone to him and said, I didn't go to him after I found Bad Dog Buzz Sawyer with, there were, about 10 of those little vials of cocaine. Most of them empty around his hotel room when I went in there to get him up to go to a show. I had to carry. That's the one where I had to have him help carry to the car. Yeah, I never went to Ole about that because it wasn't a matter of not being a stooge or whatever. He didn't really need to know, and I knew that it was going to put him in the middle because Buzz was a draw. That was one of the reasons why he kept using him. He did draw money. He was believable as a mad dog because he was kind of a
loose cannon indeed.
So when Ole came and asked me what was wrong with Tommy, I've got to tell him the truth. I can't just say, oh, he's got a cold. I said, he's stoned. And he said, what? He said, yeah, he's been doing drugs. Now we've crossed the Rubicon. Now you're committed. Yeah. Now that we were in the area of drugs with Ole, I had to set a benchmark of what our relation was going to be. And I told him, look, I said, I'm not going to come to you about guys doing drugs because just about everybody's doing something. I said, if you want to know, if you're curious, I said, now I'm not just talking generically, but in these specific cases, if you want to know, just ask me, I'll tell you, but I'm not going to come to you. And I said, and the other thing is, any kind of drug use that's going on has been going on forever. A lot of these guys, if they're doing drugs, they were doing them when they came here. They didn't start here.
Right.
And I've been able to handle it. I've been able to handle everything so far, so I haven't had to come to you for help from, you getting somebody in the office and chew them on a new one, to get them to straighten up. I said, I haven't needed to do that yet. So, but I hope that day doesn't come. I should, I was a booker myself. I should be able to handle this stuff. And I've handled it before when I was the one in charge. So that was the way we started. He never, first of all, he wasn't in the dressing room that much to observe guys. If he was in the building, he was up around the box office because that's where his interest was. especially in Cleveland, where you might draw $50,000.
Yeah.
He wanted to be in that box office because when you draw 50,000, there's all kinds of people wanting to get in the box office to go see their relative or whatever, just to see if they can get their hand on some. I don't mean stealing it. If you're standing right there, like if you are Ole Anderson standing right there, the people at least are going to do it right in front of you. So anyway, that's where our connection about the drugs went. He didn't need to know. He had enough on his mind. He had the big picture. I was just taking care of say in a movie you have the feature and then you have the early show, might be a cartoon or the Three Stooges. I was handling that part of things. As far as he was the one arranging for the theater and for the movies and all that to be played. He was doing all the big, heavy work, and he shouldn't have to handle the details. It'd be like the head of General Motors coming down and going out and showing somebody how to work on the line on the very start where they're assembling the cars. He takes off his jacket and everything, rolls up his sleeve and starts showing the guy how to put on tires. No. You don't do that. You have a much bigger responsibility. You're responsible for all the tires and everything else about the cars and everything else about the company. So, and that was always position. So I tried to take up as much slack as I could. And the other thing was, if I have to go to him for everything, then what kind of authority do I have? I needed to have my own authority. That when he wasn't there, I already had enough problems with Buzz Sawyer going over my head. So I was gonna keep Ole out of as much as possible. So yeah, that's where that came from.
Well, originally you hear a lot of, and you've talked about it a ton on here. The guys were more, like Ole even said here in this excerpt, the guys were more about the marijuana, the weed. Of course, there's a lot of drinking going on back then. Lots of drinking and driving. Everybody's admitted to that one. I can't, it's like you said, I said, I can't believe there weren't more accidents, but as you pointed out, most of the driving was late at night. Not that that's okay, but it does put a lot of people out of risk, right? Of harm's way anyway. But but as the 80s came, you hear a lot more talking of, as you just said, the popping of the pills. And of course, Coke came out and it became very prevalent by the 80s for certain. And so Ole goes on, he tells a little story here. He says, I first became aware of the drug problem the guys had when I went to the Carolinas in 1981. When the guys would joke about drugs, I thought they were just joking. But drug use among the boys was widespread. One night, one of the boys looked at me and said, geez, I have a tough decision to make. What's that? I asked. The person he was speaking to said, well, I don't know whether I should spend my money on Coke or food this week. We all laughed. But the guy would do things to make you wonder, is he serious? In fact, until Bob Roop came along, that's what I thought it was. Drinking. What else was he doing? I didn't know, but I soon came to realize that I had a whole crew of dopeheads. Holy balls, I said to Bob. Is there anybody who isn't on this shit? Holy balls. Was that one of Ole's favorite lines there, or is that just for the book?
He didn't use it ever. It wasn't something he used like saying hi, but when he wanted to really make a point, he'd say that because it just stand out. I don't remember anybody. I don't know anybody else ever said that to me, really. So, he would, when he was really surprised, or startled, he would, into a new awareness, like, wait a minute, I got a whole crew of druggies here. Oh my God, I'm their boss. I mean, if you think about it, and everybody gets arrested, you're the guy that hired them. The authorities might be looking at you. I mean, do you think? He was not real thrilled to find. But you know what? I told him, I recall this too. He said, well, was this crap been going on? I said, yeah. I don't remember if Tommy had his accident by that time or not. With him, now, this is irony. Tommy had we talked about the car wreck last week, correct?
Yeah.
Well, that was a big deal in terms of who it was going to cost the company or Tommy or Ole or combined all of them. It was going to cost $25,000 or $30,000 to pay for that car because it was totaled. What happened? It was going to be they were going to have to pay for it if Tommy was found guilty or proven that he was drunk.
Right.
But when what you said last week opened up a complete new window for me because I couldn't imagine how Tommy got away with not being checked for drugs because he was obviously on something. Now, of course, when you come on to a guy after a car's been turned over and he's not really responsive or whatever, it could be, of course, as a result of the accident, so, and the cop didn't know him. But I mean, even if you watch wrestling, even Tommy doing an interview, sorry, Tommy, but anytime he do an interview, didn't give the impression he was like high on speed or anything. He was always that slow drawling country boy with his interviews and the way he moved and everything. But so, yeah, the good luck was that Tommy wasn't on, he was definitely messed up. It wasn't on booze.
Right.
It was on pills.
That's why he passed whatever breath test, or whatever they did there.
Yeah. So when, all of a sudden, it hadn't come back yet. So during a week or so, or maybe we just hadn't learned about it yet, but during the week or so before we found out about what had gone down or got the results of the test back, Ole was going to have to pay for the car because Tommy didn't have the money. Tommy had some land, some property that he owned. He was going to sell that and give Ole the money to pay for the vehicle. So,
right.
Yeah. Right. So you got some serious, deals here. Tommy's going to have to sell that property for what he can get for it.
Yeah.
And when you're desperate to sell, you might take half of what you could get at the appropriate time. So all that went away. When it found out that Tommy wasn't drunk, there was no foul. There was harm, definitely, but there was no foul. So the owner was self-insured, so the owner was screwed. Of course, what happened? We lost the business. Here we go from
the rental
driving.
Car?
Yeah, we lost. Well, he wasn't going to rent cars to us anymore.
Sure, no.
and the word went around. I think by the time, within a month or two, we were going up there twice a month for a week and renting cars for that whole week.
Talking about going up to Ohio, Michigan.
Going up from Atlanta to Ohio.
Yeah.
And we rent a car for the week. I think by a month later, I think we're at Rent-A-Wreck. At Rent-A-Wreck. Nobody else would rent a car to us.
Oh, wow.
And so, and only I had to pay for insurance for all the cars, of course, in order to get the business. So
now that's big business when you're flying the guys from Georgia to Ohio and renting them cars. This is not your normal territory operation. Ole's trying to run, something big here, and obviously he's trying to expand into these other states and things. And I don't know if we'll get to it this week, but I do have that in my notes as well. We'll talk about how Ole got into those states and some of the maybe the issues he encountered along the way and some of the things he did to succeed there. He goes on here in this story. He says, just about everybody was on drugs. I was just amazed that was the case. I never dreamed things would get to that point. That lifestyle was so alien to me that it was impossible for me to understand it. This is Ole, a very gruff, very mature human being in most ways anyway. And he's saying that it was so alien to me doing drugs that it was impossible for me to comprehend this many people were doing these things while they were out being rock stars, basically. And yet I couldn't lay down the law because I'm not that stupid. And here's where the dilemma comes in. Ole asks, how can I fire everybody that was on dope? You had to let it go ahead and play things by ear. If someone got messed up enough that he couldn't perform, I would get rid of them. But I didn't fire them until they screwed up in such a way that it affected my business. Drug use was so prevalent that if I were to fire everybody that was on some kind of a drug, I wouldn't have had anybody working for me. It would have been Ole Anderson wrestling Bob Roop in 2-hour matches every night. So as time went by, I realized...
Oh my God. I'd be one big bruise.
Yeah, that would... brother. So as time went by, I realized what was going on, and holding things together was a constant battle. So Ole, and I think I have another note here somewhere too, but he's basically saying, I know all these guys are on things, but I can't fire my entire roster, especially my money makers. So he had to play it by ear. How bad did they screw up? And that's a terrible position to be in when you know all of your employees to some degree are screwed up and you really can't do anything about it or you won't have a business.
Right. Well, it was hard on him. It was hard on me too, because in a sense I was, and this isn't for me, but I was in the middle between the boys and him. Most of the guys you couldn't tell, but Tommy was doing the downers. A lot of the guy, if guy was on coke, you couldn't tell because a lot of guys did speed. They do the uppers, the black beauties and all that, or whatever they could get with speed. And they just would be hyper. But when a guy was, you got hyper over here, like two guys who look like a couple of beavers, chopping down a tree and chewing down a tree, and there's Tommy sitting in the corner looking like a big pile of mush. He was on the opposite end of the spectrum. He was on the downers. The guys on the uppers could go out and perform. I mean, they would overperform sometimes. They go out there and run around and look like, Charlie Chaplin days, the Keystone Cops, all running around, running at each other and all that. Actually, things would speed up a little bit because, especially if both guys were wired. And here's the deal. If one guy was, and you were working a program with him every week in a town, or maybe if it was a program that was going all over the territory, and every night you were getting in the ring with this guy who was, all juiced up. Most guys, unless you were somebody that was really, really down and secure in yourself, but other guys in pro football, I'm just taking a side here. A lot of the guys that never used drugs in pro football, any kind of stimulants, they started using them because the other guys, the guys playing across from them, like linemen especially, right. The guys across from them were juiced to the bone on something, usually high, speed. And so if you didn't use it, it gave them such an advantage that if you didn't use them, the guy was going to have that split-second quickness over you that was provided by the chemicals. So in order just to keep your job, you almost had to do it. And that was pro football. Well, it's the same thing in all sports. If you're out there with a guy who's, juiced out of his mind, I'm not saying everybody would do the same thing, but you might consider it. Now, if you had tag team, if one heel was juiced, probably both of them were. And probably the same with the baby faces. A lot of guys, you couldn't tell it because they weren't ODing on it. They didn't go out there where they were, doing cartwheels and backflips on the way out there. It was hard to tell. But a lot of times when they came back, you could tell because they had all the adrenaline and everything. Some of them came back for the match. They looked like the top of their head was going to pop off. They'd be so high. But with Tommy was the complete opposite. And I told the one last week about in Cincinnati, he went out there and the Road Warriors were,
Poor
they
Brad.
They were beating up his tag. Well, they weren't hurting Brad, but the thing is that they were.
Well, it was the Road Warriors. They were hurting him a little bit, Bob.
Yeah, they were. They were a little bit. It looked like they were killing him. And Tommy's about 4 feet away, and he's not only 4 feet away, he's in a position where he could actually jump off the apron. You know that elbow he would do? That elbow? Bring on top of the head? Yeah. He could have jumped off the apron and dropped an elbow on one of their heads easily. All he had to do was let go of the ropes. But if he had let go of the ropes, he would have fallen on. He would have fallen off the apron onto the floor, probably really on his head.
Unfortunate for and we've heard there's other stories of I think it was Buddy Roberts of the Freebirds maybe that fell asleep on the top turnbuckle, kind of laying on it kind of while he was waiting to be tagged in at one point. And I don't know how true that story is, but they say that happened when they got called up to New York. And they didn't last too long in New York, did the Freebirds, after that incident.
Oh, no.
But there's a lot of crazy things. There's a story of Andre the Giant who may have had a few bottles of wine too many and passed out in the middle of the ring while he was in a headlock or a front face lock or something like that. Can you imagine trying to wake him up or get him up off the mat? So things happen, unfortunately.
I'd have rolled him over and pinned him.
Oh, man. I wouldn't want to wake that sleeping giant.
Yeah.
You pinned me, boss?
Now, I want to go back just a second. Tommy Rich, if you're listening to this, I never told Ole about that day in Cincinnati. If I had told him, you'd have been fired. He wouldn't have tolerated that in a second, that you couldn't get off the apron to even participate in the match.
Well,
he would have been fired. You'd been fired that day. So I didn't tell him. I wasn't just protecting you, Tommy. I was protecting the whole business. You were a major player. And I didn't want to lose you. If you kept doing that, I would have had to. But I didn't tell Ole, so I'm not all heel as far as you're concerned.
Well, unfortunately, people do things, especially in the wrestling business, and then when we discuss them here, or anybody discusses them out there, it might upset the other people involved, but that's really not the intent at all. It's just to go back and tell these stories. They just happen to be part of it. you created this story and, now it exists. So what are you going to do about it? And I did want to mention this excerpt here in regards to, we were just talking about Ole being kind of screwed and how to handle this thing. And he did state that was one place where all my principles went into the toilet in regards to not being able to, fire people like he needed to. Right. He said, but I only had two options. I could have fired everybody and had nothing, or just kept going and hope I had enough stroke. I'm assuming he talks about with the local towns, that they didn't get so messed up that it would have caused us some serious problems, legal or otherwise. For the most part, it worked like that. But I would say by the time 1984 rolled around, things were pretty much out of control. The guys still made the shows, but there were more and more difficulties between the shows and on the off days. Now, I don't know if we're going to get into it this week, but you've told your side of the story in regards to the Paul Orndorff situation and him no-showing that show down there in Georgia. Ole has the other side of it. So we're going to actually complete that puzzle at some point as I think about, he talks about difficulties here. And I'm not saying Paul was on drugs that day. We know you kind of speculated that it was probably because Paul knew he wasn't going to get paid much and didn't really feel like making the town, really.
Paul was just, rest in peace, Paul. But Paul just really, he didn't understand the business. I mean, the fact that he would ask me to not beat him in a town because it was near where he grew up just shows a complete lack of understanding about the wrestling business. It's like you're in a play and you're the heel in the play, but now we're playing in your hometown and you tell the babyface, look, I'm going to still be the heel, but I want to have your lines and you take mine, okay? You can't do that, Right. So he didn't really understand the business, and that's the reason I gave him some slack, because he didn't get it. You can't choose what towns you're going to go to, Paul, and you can't think you get away.
This is pre-New York Paul Orndorff. This is before his big run. This is before later on in WCW, and I'm sure he matured along the way in regards to how the business worked, because he helped run a lot of things behind the scenes. He helped train in the power plant and things. But yeah, we got to remember, this is early 80s Paul Orndorff, still jacked to the gill, looking like, Greek god, and obviously, one of the top talents. I mean, you could strap a rocket ship to him and blast them off to the moon in regards to, if you wanted to have a perfect wrestler physically, and Paul was a great wrestler on top of it. He was a great performer in the ring. But if you just wanted to have, a great looking guy in that spot, Paul was it. So he had everything going for him. So I could see where little things like that, it was like, well, maybe he got away with it in another territory. I don't know.
Well, look at that, what you're just talking about, that picture. Now, let's go back to Mid-South, where the time where Bill asked him to do the job for Dog.
On TV.
And I was up there too. And if you put me and Paul, say Bill had called me down there, and Paul and I were both standing in front of him. What Bill looked up, what he saw was like before and after. I was before. I was a fat guy, or it could have been like too skinny. And after, Paul was the after, the guy he looked, first of all, he was a lot better looking than I was. He had he had nice head of hair on him. He had a great body. He was narrow-waisted, slim-hipped. I was kind of straight up and down. Even in my best shape, I was never like that classic Adonis type shape.
Right.
And so, he looked like, if you brought somebody in and said, choose one of these guys to be your champion, if you didn't know either one of us, I think 99 out of 100 people would have chosen Paul. And I wouldn't blame him, because he looked like $1 million.
Yeah.
Now, there's another side to it. You don't just take your body in the ring. You have to take your mind, too, and be able to go out there, especially when you're the heel. You have to go out there. You have to be able to manage the match, manage the audience, manage the referee, manage your opponent, manage yourself. And so you're in charge of a lot of things. The babyface doesn't have to worry about that. So Paul didn't have all the tools he needed then. And I was really happy to see him go up to New York and have some great success. He had gotten his own way, and he had gotten in his own way by trying to have things his own way earlier. By the time he got to New York, and I think Vince Jr. made it real clear, you better, pretty
fall
well known.
You want to make some money, just fall in line?
Yeah, don't mess around with Junior. You're going to be out of here. And he had people like Monsoon and all those other acolytes that were on hand to watch what was going on, to remind Paul every night, or remind everybody every night. and that thing that happened with Vader also really enhanced him. That gave him a lot of stature among the boys. If I find out a guy, really is tough, it gives the guy a lot more stature among the guys. I mean, they might not be afraid of him, but they have respect for that because, some of the guys that came into business weren't even athletes in high school. The best athletes for wrestling would be football. For pro wrestling, would be contact sports.
Right, contact sport, absolutely.
Yeah, football, wrestling, judo, martial arts to some extent, where you're putting your hands on another person or you're running into them violently. But you say, "What? Wait a minute! I lettered for 4 years at my school in archery. I now want to go and be a pro wrestler." Oh, you were an archer, huh? Well, take an arrow and stick it where the sun don't shine. But anyway, I was glad to see Paul get turned around.
So we've got a couple stories here that Ole tells in his book from this era as well, Bob, and I'm sure your name's going to pop up at some point here, but I wanted to share them with you, see if you have any memories or at the very least, get your take on them. And Ole doesn't name the person involved in this story, but it's pretty obvious, I think, based on some of the stuff we've already discussed, who is likely the culprit in this story. Let's just put it that way. As Ole says, I won't embarrass him by mentioning his name. He was incoherent much of the time. When he was in Atlanta working with Georgia Championship Wrestling in the early 80s, he used to say to me, I hate it when you tell people that I'm on dope. I would look back at him and say, well? And so the story goes, he wouldn't have an answer. One time, he actually did cocaine right in my car. We were driving from Asheville to Atlanta. Prior to that, I was sure that he was on it, but now he came out in the open with it. He had just finished working, and we were in my car driving back to Atlanta to make the evening show at the Omni. He looked over at me and said, I want to ask you something. He was stumbling over his words, mumbling. I had a feeling he wanted to ask me about taking some dope, but I played along with him. What do you want? I asked. He said, I'm really tired and we have another match coming up. I would feel a lot better and it would pep me up if I could just take another hit. I was curious to see what he'd do. I'd never allowed it before in my car. I would have beat the hell out of him or anybody before I let them do drugs around me, let alone in my car. But because I wanted to see it for myself, I said, yeah, go ahead. And as I watched, he took that little vial out and sniff, sniff, sniff. He seemed to me that he was feeling pretty good. In a very short time, he began talking and discussing the matches. 30 minutes or so later, he did it again, but he didn't ask for permission this time. 20 or 30 minutes later, he did it again, and he didn't ask. I saw it, so there's no question of me making it up. I sat there and watched him do it. So Ole basically saying that I could see Ole beating the piss out of somebody pulling drugs out in his car, but he let this guy do so just because he wanted to see it for himself. Now there's proof, and it's no longer hearsay. Ole sees this guy doing drugs in his vehicle, but this guy is important to the business, and so he just has to put up with it.
I've been sitting here trying to figure out who it is. First of all, I'm trying to think who would he have in the car with him. Could have been Jake the Snake, but I doubt that. I think Jake would have figured out a way to do it without letting Ole know. All you have to do is have a bathroom stop or something. Anyway, well, that's interesting. I never heard that from him.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great book. It's a great read. I read it years ago, shortly after it came out. So all of this is like new to me again. So it's real fun to go through all of this. It's cool to utilize it here on the show, but it gave me a reason to read it anyway. So that was an interesting situation, though, to picture Ole Anderson in the car with somebody having the balls to even ask him, much less do it repeatedly without asking him after the fact. He's got another fun little ditty, because you've talked about it. Going back a year, you've mentioned randomly off and on how fun it was to watch the interactions between the Iron Sheik and Ole Anderson. And so Ole has a little story here in the book about these interactions with the Sheik.
Yeah, him and the Sheik were hilarious together.
It was like slapstick. Yes. It sounds like if Ole was the straight man, it sounds like classic. I mean, if you just put that shit on video now, it would make a fortune, right?
Oh, hilarious. Yeah.
The Iron Sheik was a character in and of himself. That's why I get a kick out of this story, because Ole goes, I probably find Khosrow Vaziri, the Iron Sheik, more times than anyone else, but that was more of a joke than anything. The only thing is, the joke always stuck. I never gave him the fines back. It was like a rib on the square. If he did something stupid, I would say, you did so-and-so. That'll cost you $50. He would cry out, oh, who told? Kaz used to massage my neck on occasion. He would be standing behind me, of course, and the rest of the guys were in front of me. I couldn't see Kaz, so he would take one hand away and give me the finger or some other rude gesture behind my back. Of course, Bob Roop was there most of the time. Bob would give me the Iggy or give me a look or whatever, so I knew Khosrow was doing something silly. I didn't know what he did, but I didn't have to know. I just said, okay, Kaz, that just cost you $50. He would cry out, oh my God, who stews on the Iron Sheik? So I love the fact that he's referring to himself in the third person. It's like, who stews on the Iron Sheik? He is the Iron Sheik. And I just picture him doing that. Oh my God, not another $50. There goes my medicine money, Bubba.
Yeah. Yeah, he's talked about himself in the third person all the time.
Yeah.
By the way, you two great voices. I heard your Dusty is right on. Sheiky Poo is right on too. That's great stuff. Yeah.
Not too bad about the Bob Orton, Daddy.
Yeah. Oh man, that's a good one too. Yeah. I don't know if I told this one last week, but one time there wasn't any audience. It was just me, Ole, and Khosrow. We were checking into a hotel, and I remember it was cold. It was Pennsylvania, gray and cold, and we were inside checking in. Khosrow was just checking, had just finished checking in. We'd gotten his key and was on the way out. And Ole came in. Khosrow said something. You're lucky, we're not to have a wrestling match. I take you down. All that. He gave him crap. So Ole said, "Well, wait for me. As soon as I check in, wait for me." So we checked in. We walk out, and Khosrow's waiting out front on the sidewalk, and Ole says, Ole, I saw him reach into his pocket. And so he came out, and so Ole walked right up to him, like to let Khosrow go shoot in for like a takedown. Now, it's concrete walk here.
Yeah.
So he figured he's not gonna go down on his knees himself. He's gonna come in and try to grab Ole's leg. Well, she done the same thing in the dressing room. So Khosrow goes to reach in to grab his leg. Ole's got in his hand, Ole's got his car keys. He takes the key and he puts the tip of it to the back of Sheik's head and pulled it all the way forward to down between his eyes. He had a divot. I mean, he didn't need stitches, but it bled. I mean,
right.
He scratched the hell out of Khosrow. Khosrow grabbed the back of his head, the front of his head. He just spun in circles. Oh, you cheap shot, you. Oh, yeah. And even he was laughing. But Ole, I thought, how could Ole go, do that much damage to someone and not worry about it, what you said last week about, he said he enjoyed hurting people. Well, he got a kick out of that one.
Openly admitted that. Yeah, this is more of a rib, though, right? Like a car key, just kind of scraping it. But
oh yeah,
that's hilarious. And I could see, oh my, again, I wish these things were on video, right? Where were camera phones back then? My God. Well, if they were, a lot of guys would have went to jail, but that's another story.
Yeah. Well, it was the way that Khosrow sold things,
Yeah.
He acted like you hit him in the head with an axe, You talk about entertainment.
He was a real character, right? Inside of not just his Iranian character in the ring, but outside of the ring. I mean, my God, just constant entertainment. You said it before. I think sometimes Ole just kept him around because of how entertaining he was, not counting his talent in the ring or, his ability to get over his, one of the top heel draws.
He used that same kind of character. I saw he brought it out to the Hall of Fame. I think it was Cauliflower Alley. Yeah, he brought it out there, and he was using that character at the dinner, at the lunch, the dinner, the main dinner, and he was using that character where he was loud. And Ox Baker did the same thing with his chick.
Yeah.
But the thing was, there were part of it that used MF or swear words. Yes. And at the dinner, there's all kinds of there's young people there and women. And the people that ran CAC didn't appreciate that kind of language. I think they barred Ox Baker. I don't know if they ever invited Cos back or not. But he also got that radio jockey who's a top guy. I can't think of his name.
Howard Stern.
Yeah, Kyle's got on Stern Show 4 or 5 times, didn't he?
I don't know how many times he got on there, but the first time he was on there was the lasting impression. That was my God, that was the gold, if you will. And he kind of learned that he had a resurgence. He couldn't work anymore in the ring, but he kind of made a second life for him as far as finances go, because he learned that comedy shtick and certain language he was using was really getting over. So he did a bunch of shoot interviews where he was paid probably pretty decently. I hope his agent didn't take all the money, but yeah, he did a ton of that stuff after that because it got over huge. Now, some of the things he was saying wasn't necessarily acceptable. That shows you, even though Sheiky was out there, he still understood, because as he progressed with that character, he eliminated certain words. So it was still as enjoyable, but he removed certain slurs and things from the comedy, if you will, if that's what you want to refer to it as. I got to be honest with you, back when that whole thing started, you would laugh so hard you couldn't breathe at some of the nonsense it was coming out of his mouth. Oh, yeah. It's just insane. But yeah, I remember the Howard Stern show, absolutely.
Well, Cosmo and I were pretty close at one time. I mentioned on a previous episode that we roomed together on the road whenever we could. Mm-hmm. And also I stayed at his house in Atlanta. I knew his family. I knew his wife very well. He lost a daughter, was murdered, which was really sad. He had some tragedy in his life, but I stayed at his home, and he was in front of his family, especially his wife. He was the soul of respectability. I mean, no language, no untoward behavior at all. Mm-hmm. But then when he and I would get together, he would have me go. We'd go back into a room off his bedroom. He'd pull out a bag of goodies, and we'd imbibe if we wanted to. And he always had 4 or 5 different kinds of things to play with.
The medicine, Bubba.
The medicine. But he showed me, the reason I mentioned us being tight, because of what I was going to follow up with. He showed me, or he didn't show me, he told me, he had that brief push as the interim champion between Hogan
and Hogan.
Yeah, between Backlund and Hogan. So he was champion for a while. And just that brief push, he told me that he got 2 royalties check for the dolls and the toys and things. Mm-hmm. He said the first one was $95,000 and the next one was $105,000. Wow. So almost $500,000 and just 2 payments. That's some serious money,
Well, he probably got about 6 cents of that from me. One of my first 2 action figures from the wrestling line was the Iron Sheik. So
good. I'm glad to hear it. Well, he was. He was a character, but he had substance. He was third in the world, an amateur wrestler, and the stories he told about what was going on from Iran. Yeah, and going on. One of his wrestling teammates was murdered by the Shah. It's one of the reasons Cosmo left the country. He had a wrestler that was one of his teammates that was speaking out against the Shah and his fascist repression. Yeah. And he ended up murdering the guy. And, the Iranian national team, I won't go too far off track here, but they used to do things. They would go out and run all day. They would start out in the morning. They'd run to a town that was 25 miles away and they might stop for a little break halfway there. They get there, they have a brief lunch, rest a little bit, and then they run back. It's like 2 marathons in one day. And I said, well, did you stop on the way? He said, no, we just ran. We stopped, we did exercises, we did calisthenics. Well, no wonder they were in shape. You guys have the ability to do that. Well, the reason I tell that story is that he was teammates with this wrestler that was murdered. And the guy that was murdered was a 2 or 3 time world champion and very well known internationally, and not just a great wrestler, but apparently a very good man, because he was trying to use his notoriety to try to stand up for personal freedom and liberty, and he got murdered for it. So yeah,
assuming when Sheik saw somebody of that stature could be murdered, he knew that he could easily be next. So yeah, okay.
Well, he was the bodyguard for the Shah's wife. He was her bodyguard for a while. Oh. I got pictures of him standing with the Shah, and I don't have them, but I saw him. Yeah, you wouldn't get that position in Iran unless you had some real stature or something. Of course, this was from wrestling.
Right.
So he had to be one of the top guys, and, he's gone now, but I was glad to know him. I was good. I'm really happy that I had a chance to meet someone like him and be friends with him.
Hey everybody, Gene Jackson here, inviting you to check out the Retro Wrestling Review, where each week I'm joined by some great co-hosts who help me review classic episodes of USWA Championship Wrestling, and right now we are doing week-by-week reviews of 1993. But we don't just do reviews, sometimes we get a chance to interview some of the people who were there and lived it, plus do watch-alongs. It's a lot of fun, so check out new episodes that drop every Wednesday at WrestleCopia.com. And to find links to everything associated to the podcast, you can go to USWApodcast.com.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here, curator of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, inviting you guys to listen to many of the programs here as part of the WrestleCopia brand, including, but not limited to, the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. You can also listen to the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories. You can also listen to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. But that's not all. You can also check out the Pro Wrestling Academy with the professor of Pro Resu, Mr. Dan Ginnity. Dan and I go back in time and cover the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to our social media guys for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. You can follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And why not subscribe to YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. And of course, now would be a fantastic time to become a WrestleCopia patron over at Patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, Patreon.com/WrestleCopia, where you get so many gifts, including all of my insanely detailed show notes for every episode of The Grenade Show, Regional Wrestling, and the Monday Warfare podcast. You'll also get early access to a lot of the podcasts here on the WrestleCopia brand, where you can listen days and sometimes as much as a week earlier than the rest of the listeners. But that's still not all, guys. You also get at least a dozen digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure each and every month, plus random bonus video drops, and of course, the Patreon exclusive Watch Along series covering many past WWF and WCW events. And if that's not all, videocasts, also now a part of Patreon. No subscription, cancel anytime. Give it a try for a month, guys. I think you'll like the content that I offer, and every penny of it goes right back here into paying the bills. So if you're looking to support that next up-and-coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia. Help me pay some of the bills to keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and all of the great shows here up and running for the months and the years to come.
Hey, it's Bob Smith, and guess what? The Outdated Wrestling Hour is now part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. But hey, no fear, you're still going to hear the unique guests, comedy, music, authors, journalists, funny people. Who knows who's going to end up on the Outdated Wrestling Hour? Remember, it's all new and all old. So check it out in the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and wherever you get your podcasts. Listen if you know what's good for you.
And Ole closes the story here and talking about all these $50 fines he would give Khosrow. He says later on those nights, the Iron Sheik would go to Bob Roop and he would say, "Hey, Bob, maybe you can go talk to the Ole and get my $50 back." Of course, Bob would talk to me, but I never returned the $50 to Kaz. So Ole kept the dough, it would seem, here in these little fines. And I guess Ole got a kick out of that, and Khosrow got a kick out of being the Iron Sheik. So fun stories.
I think when it came to money, Ole probably wasn't really charitable because,
You think?
you know, especially in the business he was in, the way that he took over by getting Barnett out of there
Yeah.
and knowing that it could be his turn at any moment, because as soon as he started, we'll get into this in more detail, but as soon as he started being the one to get his hands on the money first, everybody, all the other partners, Briscoes, Fred Ward, or I can't think of all the people, but all the people who
Paul
had
Jones,
shares.
Fred Ward.
Paul Jones, the one I was thinking about, Fred Ward. Yeah, not Ward so much. Ward was still running a couple of towns, and
Columbus.
Ralph Reed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Ralph Reed was his son-in-law, I think, and Ralph was tight with Ole. And I got to know Ralph pretty well. He's a good guy.
Yeah, when we get there, and we do talk about the whole TBS thing with Vince McMahon and whatnot, when we get there, we're going to see the people that Vince came to and the people Vince knew to avoid in regards to asking them about, selling some shares. So Vince had somebody in there telling him who was going to sell and who wouldn't. And it's kind of funny you talked about them all being lumped together, the Andersons, Ralph Reed, Fred Ward, because those are the people that Vince avoided. He didn't give so that's very wise, I suppose. So unfortunately, Paul Jones was in his 80s by that point. I think his wife was handling some of this stuff when we get there. But yeah, there's a lot of that. I can't wait till we get to that whole pushing Barnett out, and of course the repercussions eventually being Vince McMahon taking over the TBS slot is basically how that's going to go. But there's so much to get into before that. We're going to look at a lot of the towns you guys ran. We're going to look at some of the money. And anybody who likes facts and figures, we're not going to go deep into it, but in short term, just some of the basic numbers, the money. We're going to talk about some of the guarantees and things that Ole talks about here. Some of the guys were getting at the time, which was very interesting to me.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that. I don't know what guys were making. I know what my pay was,
right?
And that's all I was concerned about. I mean, I like everybody else. I wanted to make money, but I didn't compare myself to other people.
Sure.
I wasn't willing to, at that stage, I wasn't willing to put in the effort to look like Paul Orndorff, for example. I was drinking, and I wasn't a drunk, but I wasn't taking care of my body like I had. But I've been doing it since I was in 8th grade. So you get to a point now, you do it like 25 years of working out a lot, and I don't mean every day, but even as a pro, I would work out, at least 2 or 3 times a week. I would do something, and if I had time off, I would work out on the off days. So after a while, you just you get tired of it. I didn't totally dissipate. I just wasn't going to the gym as often then. So I didn't have the look and wasn't willing to make the effort, I didn't have any reason to feel like I deserved to make the top money.
Right.
I was happy with what I had. I had my wife with me, and we didn't have kids yet, but I had my personal life was that's part of the deal too. A lot of the guys, and all of us at one time, are separated from our families sometimes for most of the year. And I mean, even if you see them, you see them for a couple hours during the day, and even then, you're not sitting down having long conversations or watching a movie together because you don't have time. You kind of see them in passing, and your kids too. So you're not there for birthdays and wedding, marriage anniversaries, and all those kind of things. Mm-hmm. So you pay a price for it. Anyway, I didn't expect the same kind of money the top guys were getting.
So Ole talks, and this is where we're going to talk about basic payoffs and the cities. We're going to start off. We're going to talk a little bit about TV and going into Ohio and things of that nature. But first, Ole talks here about the Georgia Loop. And he says, when I was booking Georgia, it was easy enough to make $300 in Augusta, $300 in Macon. It was very easy to make $400 in Columbus, Georgia. So by Wednesday, you already had $1,000 in your pocket. Thursday was basically the shits, especially if you were in Rome. If you were on top, Rome was a $100 payoff, maybe $125. The alternatives on Thursday were Albany and Athens. The payoff for Albany was in the same range as Rome, around $100 or less. In Athens, you might make $100 if it was sold out. But generally speaking, the payoff was usually $75. So you're making over $1,000 a week just being on the roster. I'm assuming this is average pay is what Ole's referring to here. And that's the Georgia Loop. And so that's going to obviously change. We're going to see, he's going to talk about the gates some of the cities do as we go along. But would you say that's fairly accurate to the best of your recollection?
Is he saying that everybody on the card was making that?
I doubt everybody from top to bottom was.
No, he's talking about main event guys.
Okay.
Where the top guy's getting a 300. If the first match got 100, I'd be surprised.
Yeah, I think what I read in his book, I don't have it here in my notes. I think the bottom guys on those big paydays were getting like 75.
Yes, okay. That's more appropriate because first of all, I don't care who it is or what business you're in. You want to pay enough to keep people not where they're not unhappy and creating problems for you, but you don't want to pay any more than you have to, because it's a never-ending problem if you do. Because if you pay it more than a person's worth, well, what happens when business falls off? And anyway, it's just a bad policy. So, and only like what you said just a minute or two ago was about keeping the Sheiks. I was going to say, well, maybe he paid the Sheik an extra $50 a week, knowing that he was going to be fining him.
Right.
Yeah, so. But I don't know. Ole really money. Did that? Ole was about money.
That was only up to Thursday. Then on Friday, he says you'd be in Atlanta. You could make $500, maybe more. If the show was in the Omni, you could do $1,000. Saturday night was Carrollton. When you're back to making $125, maybe $150. Sunday was Marietta. Marietta could be anywhere from $150 to $250. When you add up the figures for a week in Georgia, you're looking at around $2,000 or better. And that's in early 80s money he's talking about here.
Right.
That's not too shabby there, especially when you're working a lot of spot towns like Athens and Rome.
Well, Marietta's only 30 miles from Atlanta, I think.
Yeah. It was kind of crazy how close some of the cities were, and they still did great business.
Yeah. Well, you had cable, of course, with TBS, but you didn't have cable. You didn't have matches coming in from all over the country. Georgia Wrestling was probably the only TV they were getting. I know that McMahon hadn't come in and purchased a TV on any of those stations yet. I think he was always planning on getting his hands on TBS before he had that first WrestleMania.
Yeah,
first WrestleMania. My understanding was he was close to going out of business, and that first WrestleMania brought him back not only over the top, but started like an avalanche. It started a snowball. It turned into an avalanche. And at the bottom, by the time it took out all the other promotions.
Well, they say Vince sold that slot to Crockett for $1 million, and it cost $1 million to create WrestleMania. And so they say Crockett technically paid for WrestleMania. Now, I'm sure there's a little more to it than all of that, but it's a fun story to tell anyway. Because it is kind of interesting if anybody goes and does the math and looks at the time frame. The last episode of Vince's time on TBS was the weekend of WrestleMania. He no longer needed TBS to promote the event, and he was done with it. So perfect time to get out, sells to Crockett. Yeah, it's amazing. And
it is amazing.
Yeah. That's
for
all the
sharp.
Disgusting behavior of one Vincent Kennedy McMahon, pal. He was a hell of a businessman.
Yeah, he was. And, you can't argue with success. Unfortunately, in this case, the success did destroy Rock Hunter. The liberties that he took. It doesn't matter how wealthy you are. I think your good name means more. We've talked about this before. And I don't have anything against McMahon. But I'm still glad, in spite of that, I'm talking about Cosro's payoff on those two things for the toy dolls and all that, $200,000, that represented about, let's say, 5 to 6 years of my average income when I was in there before the contractor time, and so, if I made $40,000 a year the first 3 or 4 years I was working, that was a pretty good year. It'd be like $800 a week. You couldn't depend on that. And now I wasn't main event all that time. Once I started getting main events, but even then I wasn't making $95,000 a year. So yeah, the money changed completely once it went national through McMahon.
Yeah.
The income, but really.
I'm still looking at the income here, and I'm just marveled by this is a wrestling territory. And the money that you're bringing in, you talk about being on top, $2,000 a week roughly. Ole said that's why Stan Hansen, who was there for a year, was able to make $100,000 over a 1 year period. $100,000 in that era money is well over $300,000, maybe close to $4 today.
Yeah.
That's over $350,000. And then Stan left and went to Japan and stayed there because he was making more money there. Think about how much money Stan was making in order to leave this. This is just a territory. This isn't even working for Vince. And he's making this kind of money back there working in Georgia. And Ole also said that's why Jim Barnett, it wasn't Ole, it was Jim Barnett, gave Roddy Piper a guarantee of $3,000 a week because the business was just that good. Now, Piper comes in October 31st, Halloween of 1981, and he's there through much of 1982 before he's fired by Ole. And so you do the math, though, $3,000 a week in 1981-82 money is $9,750 today. $10,000 a week working for a territory in the early 80s, Roddy Piper. And that's basically $500,000 a year in today's money Hot Rod was making working there in Georgia. And that doesn't even count the fact that he was also working for Crockett at the same time he was working for Ole.
Well, that's one guy that was worth it.
He earned that money.
Yeah, you're going to get your money back with him. You would get your money back. He was the guy could draw. You know, he had a mouth that he was the best. I mean, I've seen great interviewers, but you know, his interview was based on his character, on his physical makeup and all that. You know, and he was a genius in terms of his vocabulary and his ability to promote himself. He knew where it was. By the time he got in the ring, all you had to do in the ring was not expose the business, and you were going to be okay.
Right.
Do something to bring it back, or if it's time for a blow off, you blow it off in the right way. But you know what? There's a price to pay for that. I knew Roddy when he was young in the business. I was booking in San Francisco, and I got down to L.A. a couple of times and ran into him. And I stayed at his apartment one time. He had a little one room,
efficiency,
he had
something like that.
Yeah, efficiency. I spent the night with him one time, and I liked the guy. You know, he was a real easy to get along with, good talent, nice guy. When I saw him later, and I saw him in Atlanta. I don't know if it was. He only fired him 81. I wasn't there yet.
82. Yeah, he left before you got there.
Okay, well, I was in somewhere. It was in Atlanta. I remember being with him, and he had become jaded. Yeah, he'd been living in the fast lane. It happens to a lot of people. He'd been living in the fast lane, and it takes a price. I remember now I got to see, before I say this next part, I saw him when he was inducted into the Hall of Fame in Waterloo. I got to see him there, and he was way back. He'd been out of business for a while. He was back a lot closer to the guy I remembered. He was friendly, and he was, when I saw him in Atlanta, he wasn't even very friendly, and I don't know why. I hadn't done anything to him, but, I mean, he wasn't unfriendly. He just like he didn't care.
Yeah,
he didn't care about things. But, again, a great talent. And the night I remembered, he took out an 8-ball of Coke and spread it on a mirror. And it was a line about a half-inch wide. It was like a yard long. And, there was 4 or 5 guys just licking their chops. I don't know why he did that. I think he was going to get on a plane. He needed to get rid of it or something. But they had plenty of people there willing to help him.
I'm so sure.
But, that was typical. The Roddy I knew in San Francisco, or who lived in L.A., working in L.A., I don't know. We didn't smoke pot. He didn't smoke. We had a few beers, but that was our drug of choice. Was not even hard liquor. We just drinking a few beers, maybe more than a few, but that was it. We weren't doing any. At the time, marijuana was illegal. It was a felony in a lot of places.
Sure.
So, but yeah. Anyway, he was a great talent. And he was a really good guy too, a good person. And you know what? Look what he did. He made several movies. He really expanded from his wrestling. He was one of the first to carry over. Now everybody, it's happening, and it's happening to the business as a whole. The wrestling being on Netflix, at the time there wasn't anybody carrying over. There wasn't anybody going out and making movies where they were the star. Now you got John Cena, who's doing the same thing from his exposure in WWE, but Roddy was ahead of his time. I mean, he made more than I think he made at least 2 that I saw. I know, maybe even more.
Well, he made a ton of movies, but most of them straight to video. And but no, he had it was They Live that came out of the gate, the first one that he did that got him over there with John Carpenter. So yeah.
Well, they're still there. They're still out there, know. So yeah, he's there forever. I admire that kind of drive and and passion for trying to make your name.
Yeah. No doubt about it.
Yeah, he was one guy I was really happy that I got to know a little bit.
So talk a little bit more here in regards to people getting paid. I wanted to talk a little bit about the undercard workers, the enhancement talent, specifically in regards to television. How do these guys make a buck? Ole talks about it here in his book. He said, our method for paying the guys for TV was simple. The payoff was a flat $25. In some territories, if you wrestled on TV and you won your match, you didn't get anything. You only got paid if you did a job. In Atlanta, every time you worked on TV, you were paid $25. If one of the underneath guys needed some money and was coming in for a few days, I would book him for the weekend. On a typical Saturday, he could work twice on Atlanta TV and once for Fred Ward in Columbus TV. That was $75 in the bag right out of the gate. I would book him in Carrollton that night, which was usually another $75. So you had to work 4 times, but you were in the first, second, or third match on the show, but you're still walking out with a couple $100, $150 at least. So Ole basically saying that in some territories, if you won your match, you weren't even going to get paid. And I've heard tell of that over the years, and I guess the reason for that was you're just there to get yourself over to go make the big money on the house shows. The enhancement workers were paid because that was their job, to make you look good on TV. Now, I'm sure based on the fact that you worked a little all over the place that you probably encountered both of those situations?
I don't remember ever not being paid for TV, although I'm sure if I think I had a salary, I had a guarantee with Ole. I wasn't going to make much more than that because I wasn't working much. Once McMahon took over, I started working again. I don't remember exactly how my payoffs changed, but it was always decent. Ole took care of me.
Yeah, I just thought that was interesting because I guess every territory is different, and I'd heard both versions. Everybody got paid a flat fee, usually a very low $25. Obviously, they're not making any money in a TV studio. Those people are not paying for tickets. They're being gifted to the fans to come in and watch for free. So there's not a whole lot of money to be made there. And so Ole's saying I gave everybody a flat 25, whether you were going over or you were doing the job. And so it's kind of interesting to see how each territory was slightly different in that aspect.
Yeah, well, as far as that, I don't know. Well, guys are gonna take whatever they get. Yeah, like he said, if a guy was going to come in and do a job on TV and not make anything, why would he do it? If it does, Ole might do the carrot and stick thing, or at least the carrot part, where he says, well, this will get you seen all over the country because you're on national TV, and it'll give you a chance to, where you can call a promoter or whatever and say, yeah, watch this match or whatever. I don't know if he would say that or not, but every place else I ever worked, even Shire, because Shire stole the money from my first TV appearance, so I remember that one very well. It was only $25, but I made it way more expensive for him than he would ever. If he'd had a second chance, he said, "I'd just pay the bastard," because I told that story earlier, but I made him pay for it. But anyway, if Ole didn't have to pay you, he wouldn't. I mean, but there weren't any promoter in the country that wouldn't, if they could get away with not paying you.
Right. Well, we're going to talk about the opposite of pay now, Bob. We've got various stories of Ole Anderson having to fire talent, and he will admit that if they were talented enough, he would bring them back, which is, kind of the dilemma as a promoter. These guys are making me money. What can you do at the end of the day? And we've talked about that in the past. even though a lot of guys thought they could be blackballed, if you had enough talent, you would find out you can't be blackballed. And
Right.
so, guys, everybody from Ronnie Garvin to Randy Savage to you found out at some point that, hey, that whole blackball thing, if you got enough talent, you'll be able to be used somewhere sometime down the line, and maybe you'll do okay. But Ole talks a lot about firing a lot. There's some fun stories mixed in here, and I just wanted to read a few things. He said, I fired Abdullah the Butcher, but I'd take him back in a heartbeat. I fired Buzz Sawyer, but I hired him back too. I might fire a guy and let him stay out for 2 or 3 months, but then I was glad to have them back. While their transgressions may not be forgotten, if the guy had any talent at all, the fact that he screwed up one time didn't mean anything to me. I took more crap from Blackjack Mulligan than anyone. Bob Windham and I had been crosshairs since 1975, but when he needed help, I brought him back. You're looking at almost 20 years of problems between us, but the fact that he sucker punched me a few times didn't keep me from hiring him back because he was good for business. So now you're looking at it from a promoter's point of view, but I had to note in there that you weren't the only one that got sucker punched by old Blackjack, apparently here. Ole said he did as well. More than once, apparently.
Yeah. I happened to be in the office one time, in Ole's office. This was between 82 and 85 when I was there. Ole answered the phone, and he'd been telling me about working with Blackjack. Not that day, but earlier, about working with Blackjack. And he said Jack was really laying it in. He was really laying it in. And so Ole gave it back to him. Later on, when he got back to the dressing room, Blackjack wanted to fight him about something, and it didn't happen. But Ole said Blackjack was laying it in. Blackjack was punching him as hard as he could, So now he wasn't hitting him in the mouth, or in the nose. He didn't think anything of that. What kind of wrestler would not? You have someone like 300 and some pound, that Blackjack Mulligan hits you as hard as he can with forearm smash to the side of the head, and you just think it's a working deal. So you just give it back to him. Anyway, we were in the office one day, and he answered the phone. He said, Jack, what is it? He was busy. He said, where am I? He said, you called me. Where do you think I am? I'm at the office.
Right.
Come on down. Blackjack, he hung up the phone. I said, what was that? He said, that was Mulligan. I said, what's the deal? He said, he just called me. He said, I'm going to kick your ass. He said, where are you? And that's when I told him, well, you call me, Jack. I'm at the office, and he never showed up. But that's when Ole told me about Jack had a history of laying. I think he told me about him doing it to Buck Robley. Now, he hadn't done it to me yet, but apparently did the same thing to Buck Robley one time, took him aside and just smashed him. He had some wires crossed somewhere. Oh, Jack did. And,
I mean, I believe, when we went through the story with Mulligan, when I was doing research for one of my other shows, there was even an issue there in somewhere around 86, 87, where Mulligan owed somebody some money or something along those lines. And, he did another sucker punch there. And so it got to the point where he was so destitute or financially incapable of doing much of anything that the guy that he sucker punched said, you know what, I feel bad for this guy. I'm not even going to sue him anymore, which is just crazy to think about, unfortunately the counterfeit story later on. And so, there was a lot of ups and downs in the world, but man, what a talent he was when he was in his prime and ready to go was old Bob Windham there.
Think about this, a guy with those kind of issues where he loses it. Those times he's punching people, they don't deserve it.
That's not an average sized guy, that's going to.
No, and you're 300, you're 6'5" and 320 pounds, and strong, and you're not just some big blob. You're a put together guy and you got a nasty temper, and all the muscle and size to back it up. You're not saying, I'm worried about you punching me. I want to know where you are. You actually call in advance. Where are you? I want to come punch you out. You're talking about a guy having confidence.
Yeah.
I would tell him, well, I'm in San Francisco right now. You're gonna have to wait till I get back. They you thought you were calling me in Atlanta, but they forwarded the call.
Yeah, forwarded the call.
Yeah. So, but anyway, yeah. Maybe there's some my Dr. Psychobabble maybe there was some bipolar there. He just, he went into another persona that just saw whatever was happening as some kind of threat or insult or something.
Right.
I don't know. I never did anything to him for him to punch me. It was good though, because I had punched a couple people that didn't deserve it, and I felt like what Jack did was karma. And I didn't have. I mean, later on, at first, I was so pissed off, I was going to go get him.
Well, that was karma also. It came back.
Yeah, it was. It was. I didn't have to stay in my own psyche and all that by taking a baseball bat to him or anything. So, yeah, I mean, I'm sorry it happened. Mainly because his son got
Kendall.
Kendall. And I really liked Kendall. And I liked having him and Barry. They were the only two wrestlers I hung around with at all when I was booking. When we were at shows fairly close to Tampa, we'd come back. There was a bar we went to. It was almost deserted when we'd go in there, just a little small place. We'd go and have a few drinks, just, shoot the crap.
Last week, I referenced a story with Dr. D, David Schultz, who came down there to work for Ole, and I found the story in the book, so I wanted to read Ole's version of it because he tells it better than I did. And he said, I don't think you can find too many instances someone missing a booking. Everyone knew that if you didn't make the town, you didn't have a job. David Schultz called me one day and said he wanted to wrestle in Georgia over the Christmas holidays. He said he needed the work. He wanted to work for 10 days, so I booked him. He didn't even show up. He called me again the following year. Once again, he wanted to work. I said, fine, I'll give you 5 dates. This time, he showed up. But when he walked in the door, I said, now we're even. What do you mean we're even? Asked Schultz. Well, last year I booked you and you didn't show up. This year you showed up and I didn't book you. He thought he had gotten away with it, but he didn't. It just took a year for me to get revenge. Oh, was he hot? He was going to kill me. He was going to shoot me. That I believe. He was going to do all kinds of nasty things to me.
Yeah.
He said, if I had a nickel for everybody that was going to kill me, I would be so rich that I wouldn't have to lift a finger for the rest of my life. So, I mean, playing games with Dr. D. David Schultz there. Something tells me Schultz didn't slap Ole like he did Stossel, though.
No, I mean, but that was risky business. It wasn't that. Now, David Schultz, don't get me wrong, David, if you're out there. Is he still alive?
He's out there. He's out there.
I'm not, this is an insult at all. I have all the respect in the world for you, but also for your potential ferocity. If you're mad at somebody, for example, like Sasso or whoever it might be.
Yeah.
I just put it this way. If I was a scope law that was on the run for the law and you were the one looking for me, I wouldn't be real happy about that, quite frankly. I'd rather have Mulligan coming after me instead. Schultz just gave that. Mulligan didn't look. He didn't look nasty. Schultz. Again, it might have been a work. It might. But when
he was a bounty hunter too in real life.
Right. That's what I mean.
I think he understands. What is expected of him as a human being, but I also don't think, at times at least, that he really gave a shit.
No, I don't either. I told that story about the interview he did with a little kid that I thought was one of the most brilliant interviews I ever saw. And I was mad at it myself. And I was, I'm smart. I'm smart
in the log cabin there with Vince. What
a butthole. He traumatized that little kid who was an actor or something, I guess. Right. I don't think it was his kid, but,
no.
They get in there and the kid's not playing his part right. Schultz is talking to him. The kid's supposed to be a little bit scared of him. The kid's sitting there beaming at him. Schultz says, "What are you laughing at?" The kid went, "Oh!"
You got to scare the act into him, right?
I thought, I'm thinking behind the scenes. Like, I'm the booker and you're doing this. I thought, oh my God, you as a person would do that to this poor kid, you know.
Well,
but even now, I'm reevaluating that position. Yeah, you do it and then you apologize as soon as it's over. Sorry, son, I didn't mean to scare you.
You're going off the assumption that he apologized.
I don't know about that either. He probably said, who booked this kid? I'm going to kick his ass.
So Ole hit the heavy bags here with some of the stories he tells about firing talent. Paul Orndorff, we're going to get to the Roddy Piper story. We're going to get to as many as we can this week on the show. But up next is the time Ole fired a young Bret Hart, and I do mean young. That is indeed the same one and only hitman Bret Hart, Stu Hart's kid. He missed the shot in Augusta, says Ole. The next day, he came into my office and fed me a story about getting lost, or whatever his excuse was. I gave him the benefit of the doubt, but the next night he was booked in Macon, and he missed that one too. Once again, on the following day, he walked into my office to give me another excuse for why he didn't make it on Tuesday. I said, I'll tell you what, don't worry about tonight. Bret Hart asks, well, where am I going to be? I shrugged my shoulders. I don't know. Well, am I working somewhere? Ole responds, I haven't any idea. Well, what's running tonight? Ole responded, Columbus is running. Bret Hart asks, am I booked there? Ole responds, no. Why aren't I booked there? Asked Hart. Listen, I said, on Monday you were booked in Augusta and you didn't make it. On Tuesday you were booked in Macon and you didn't make it there either. Tonight, you're not booked in Columbus. But by the same token, I'm not looking for you. If you show up, that's your business. Buy a ticket and come on in. Now, that was a very young Bret Hart. I believe his time in Georgia was from like October to December of 1979. So this was a young Bret Hart still learning, but also coming from the Hart family, right? So he already had that built-in territory up there in Calgary working for his father. And Ole says, a few days later after firing Bret, and don't worry, guys, Bret Hart fired in early December. He's going to pop back up in Stampede by the end of December. So he didn't necessarily lose a job, but I do get a kick out of this because here's Ole doing Stu Hart impression here in his book. He said, Stu called me and said, you fired my boy. So Stu Hart calling Ole Anderson, wanting to know, why did you fire my son? Stu, he didn't make the towns. I can't operate like that. Stu was a little upset about it, but at the end of the day, the kid never worked for me again. So Ole Anderson making enemies at all the time. And that's the job of a promoter. You can't put up with that. Guys no-showing events just for the hell of it.
No. Oh, the second night, no, after that. Even if it's, unless, the guy said, the second night, well, I had an accident, you go out and his car's torn up or, whatever.
Right.
The one night's bad enough. You do it twice. And you know what? Also, that in my mind, coming from a wrestling family, that he would miss two shows really is a really negative thing for him to do, because his father's a wrestling promoter.
Right.
And your father is the one that trained you and brought you into the business. Did he also teach you to miss shows? Here you are. We're trying to get you over. How are we going to get you over if you don't even show up? So yeah, there's no excuse for. And the other thing is, did he let anybody know he wasn't going to be there? It's one thing if you break down or whatever, have an accident, you call, or, well, maybe back then it would be harder, but you know what? I've called a building a few times and asked them to we call the box office and ask them to get a message to whoever. Well, I'm surprised at Hart. I wonder what Bret told his dad. Yeah, Dad, I only missed a couple of shows and the guy fired me. I don't see him saying that. So anyway, and it was a good story.
Yeah, Ole points out that, for as undependable as human beings as most professional wrestlers could be, they were fairly dependable making the towns. Like that was not the issue. They had to make their money, so they had to make the towns. So that's why he remembers these instances so vividly. And again, we're going to get to Paul Orndorff. I don't think we're going to have time for his story this week, but we will cover the time that Ole Anderson fired Roddy Piper. Now, he was fired prior to you arriving in the territory, but I thought, having back history with some of the people involved here, you might get a kick out of the story.
Oh, yeah, I am.
All right, so here we go.
Good stuff.
Yeah, Ole Anderson says, I fired Roddy Piper on a Sunday afternoon after he was supposed to make a little town outside of Atlanta. It might have been Calhoun. He called up and said, Tommy Rich and I are in town and we're on our way. We held up the show. They called back 30 minutes later, and when they still failed to show up, they called again. But they never made it to the show. Later that night, we were working in Marietta. Piper and Tommy walked in, acting as if nothing had happened. I said to Piper, just pack your bags and get the hell out of here. I'm sure he said a lot more than that, but he says, Of course, he was losing a $3,000 a week guarantee, so Roddy gave me a little lip. I said, I'll tell you what, I'll call the cops in here right now, and they'll search your bag. Then they'll search your car. By the time you get out of jail, I'll be calm enough to talk about it. Nice response there from Ole. He was stuck. He knew he had a problem, referring to Piper. He had missed the town that afternoon, which was enough reason for me to fire him. But I knew it was because he was all screwed up. He had no valid reason to miss the town. Sure, if you were in a car accident and everybody got killed, I guess you could miss the town. But nobody missed the show when they were working for me. Gotta love that. Having missed it and knowing the reason he missed it, I had no problem saying, that's it, you're fired. I let it be a lesson to his comrade, Tommy Rich, who was riding with Roddy. Tommy, I can fire you right now, or you can shape up and work. Tommy was scared to death, so he straightened up for a time, but Rich was already messed up to the point where it didn't scare him enough to keep him from doing it again. It got so bad that he walked in one night and threatened to beat the hell out of me. How screwed up do you think he had to be to think he could beat up Ole Anderson?
Tommy Rich?
Yes.
Oh, my God.
At one point near the end of 1984, Tommy Rich and Nick Patrick, the son of the assassin, Jody Hamilton, referee Nick Patrick, were both going to jump me. Everybody else made the towns every night. So I don't know. I'm going to look and see if I can find more about this story where he was going to be jumped by Tommy Rich and Nick Patrick in 1984. But I want to go back here and just, Ole didn't play around. Roddy Piper was a major commodity. He was on top. He was a top babyface at this point in time in the territory. And he missed a small town. But because Ole knew why he missed that town, he was like, I can't do this shit. You're fired. And that's Roddy Piper. So this is a true businessman. He's not playing this game with anybody.
But you know what? I love the story for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's interesting. It's funny in a way. I mean, now.
Well, especially when he says you can, maybe you can be late if you die in a car crash. But.
Yeah. If you're dead, I'll give you a break. But I'm insist having your body for the next show. No, but they also explain something that I just realized. We talked about this last week, that when Paul Orndorff, when Ole found out he missed a show, he went wherever we were at. Well, he immediately went to Paul. Paul was in the process of putting on his gear.
Right.
He had boots on and it was tight, but he had, or maybe one boot. But Ole said, pack up your shit. Now, pack it up. No, don't get dressed. Pack up your stuff. You're out of here. And he took him and walked by the arm. He grabbed him by the elbow.
And
I'm not saying he didn't put his arm behind his back, but he actually walked. When he walked through the auditorium, he didn't. There was a back door you could go out right by the dressing room where you go out and get in your car. He walked him out the front door, and there was a bunch of people out there waiting in line to get tickets. Paul had to either come back in the building and walk through the audience again, or he had to walk all the way around to the back to get to where his car was, with one boot on, one off, and it just as undertights. I often wondered why Ole was so demonstrative. Why was he so adamant? Because I didn't realize that no-show was an ironclad deal with him. I believe it or not. Mm-hmm. You know why? Because usually everybody showed up. We didn't have a lot of no-shows.
Right.
I don't remember. In fact, I don't remember any except Paul's. Well, that explains it. Thank you for that. I like to have stories finish in my head. I often wondered why Ole was so.
That's why I said it's so fun putting together the puzzle. We've heard you tell stories, and Ole tells the other half of it here in his book, or vice versa. It's really fun, being able to go back and do this. And that's why on the next episode we're going to kick it off talking about the firing of Paul Orndorff, Ole's version, which is very similar to yours, Bob. So it's almost like you were there or something, right?
Well, you know what's fun is that I'm learning stuff too. At my advanced age.
Yeah.
I believe that life is a learning experience, and the last thing you learn is what it's like not to be alive anymore, whatever that's going to be. But up to that point, I'm continuing to use my mind and stay active and try to for old timers, losing your memory and all the dementia and all that. I believe that comes from not exercising your mind in terms of being able to think and feel and both psychologically and emotionally, but staying active. And so it's nice to learn something. And I just learned something about Ole. Now, I learned it after he passed away. I'm sorry he's passed away, but it's really good to be learning new stuff about my old pal.
Right. Well, we got a slew of things to talk about next week. We're not short for topics when it comes to Georgia. I feel like we're still trying to get into your run here in Georgia because there's just so much to cover here with Ole and just the territory itself. And so next week, guys, we're going to kick off the show, hopefully talking about the story in regards to the firing of Paul Orndorff, what all went down. Again, we'll tell your version and mix it in with Ole's version. We'll also talk a little bit about the expansion and how Ole came about moving into Ohio and Michigan, West Virginia, etc. And then from there, if we have time, we'll begin the creation of the Road Warriors. Ole's version of how it started, some of the antics that he had to put up with, some of the antics you had to put up with, Bob. Some of the various stories of the Road Warriors where Ole was sad to see him go when they left for Vern Gagne. But at the end of the day, I think it created a lot less stress for Ole Anderson. So it's, and I mean that in a tongue-in-cheek kind of way to where he did not fault them. He did not dislike the roadies, but I think Ole had enough. It's like, okay, I like pizza, but maybe I'm going to, skip it for a few weeks here. And so that's kind of how he tells the story. And we'll be getting to that. There's just so much, Bob, to get into.
Yeah, the last 10 times I ate pizza, it gave me diarrhea. So I think I'm gonna move on to something else, maybe.
Well, for a little while, anyway. Yeah, there you
go. So, well, that's good stuff. I tell you, Ray, I like it. We have something that we're sharing. I'm sharing my information with you. You're sharing information you have, you're on your own or access to with me. And I think we're both learning something. I'm learning a hell of a lot more than you are, I think, but it's good stuff. I really enjoy it. You know what? Because when I think about Ole, I have a good feeling when I think about him because, like I said, I respected him and I trusted him. See, that was another thing about you could trust Ole to be himself. Ole Anderson, that's who he was, and you could trust him to be that way. He wasn't going to change. He had a way to do it, and that was his way. If you didn't want to do it, then hit the road. And I respected that. So I could trust him. And because I could trust him, I could be open with him. I could level with him.
Right.
I could tell him exactly what I thought. He didn't ask for any more. He never asked me to be a stooge. He didn't want me telling a story. I never told him a story about carrying Buzz Sawyer. Actually, unconscious, unresponsive, couldn't wake him up, pour a glass of water in his face, he still wake up. I didn't tell that story, but he didn't need to know because it didn't affect the show. It wasn't going to affect the show. I was more worried about that than Ole was, I think. And there's another thing. Those guys on the road basically were, if Ole wasn't there, and even if he was, those guys were my responsibility. Now, you say, well, but Bob, are they your responsibility in the hotel? Yes, because if they get in trouble, I need to get them if they got put in jail or whatever. I need to get them out so they can come to the show. So, yes, how they behave, let's try to see if we can influence the behavior to the point where they don't get arrested, and I don't have to go get them out of jail. So, yeah, on the road, it was my responsibility to kind of make sure that everything, the guys were reasonably, sane with their behavior, especially when we had those Michigan towns where guys could go out of there with scripts in their pocket for 100 Black Beauties and 100 sleeping pills in the same pocket from the same doctor. Just absolutely mind-boggling malpractice on my mind. But
obviously. Different times. That'll wrap it up here this week, Bob, for this week.
Okay,
but we'll be back. We got tons, like I said, to get into next week. Looking forward to all those topics and whatever else we dive into, anything that else comes to your mind during those stories we tell. So till then, we're going to say goodbye, guys, this week. Bob, I want to thank you again for enlightening us once more on your time in Georgia.
Well, just the last quick exit line.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe I can really enjoy a program where part of it was me getting knocked on my ass by Jack Mulligan.
Sure.
and leave, even including that in the program, I'm leaving with a very happy feeling in me. So thanks for a nice couple of hours. I appreciate it.